My name's Julia Kaganskiy. I just stepped down from my position as the founding director of New Ink, so I'm looking for a new way to introduce myself, searching for a new identity. For those of you who may not be familiar, New Ink is the New Museum's incubator for art, design, and technology. The program, which we launched in 2014, was designed to help creative practitioners and entrepreneurs launch and grow artistic projects and businesses. New Ink offers mentorship, guidance, skill development, and a shared workspace. But perhaps most importantly, it provides a supportive community during what can often be a very isolating and challenging period. Each year, we convene a diverse interdisciplinary cohort of like-minded peers who are experimenting with new forms of practice and searching for a sustainable, ethical business model that can support that work, which is not easy to come by. I want to just start off with a few of my favorite projects from the past 4 years. DepthKit, which was mentioned by Theo in his presentation, didn't actually originate at New Ink, but the founders, James George and Alexander Porter, they created this form of volumetric filmmaking, volumetric image capture, and released it open source, and they were using it for their own art projects. When they got to New Ink, they were kind of in the midst of their own identity crisis, where this tool had really found a huge audience online, had a lot of demand for a more professional grade version of the tool. Meanwhile, James and Alexander were creating their own artistic projects such as Clouds, which is a generative documentary about creative technology. But they were really kind of conflicted with whether they should grow the tool and really think of themselves as entrepreneurs or continue with this role of artists. And they kind of found a way to do both with this company Scatter that they established. So Scatter functions as a studio, which allows them to continue making their own creative work, but they also did end up raising venture capital for DepthKit, and so they are in the process of building it as a more robust tool for the creative community, which is really exciting. And today, Scatter continues to produce award-winning VR documentaries and experimental projects that use the volumetric filmmaking tool for VR and AR and other immersive media. And I just learned this morning that their latest project, 0 Days, which was directed by Yasmin Aliat, was nominated for an Emmy, which is super exciting. Over the years, we've seen a number of immersive storytelling studios coming out of New Ink. Another really great one is called The New Reality Co. It's founded by Winslow Porter and Melitza Zek. And they too have been creating VR storytelling projects that tackle important issues. This one is looking at climate change, and it allows you to experience the life, birth, and death of a tree as the actual tree. And it was created in partnership with the Rainforest Alliance and has similarly toured the world after premiering at Sundance and Tribeca. We've also worked with artists in a more kind of traditional fine artist sense. Stephanie DINKINS is the artist pictured here. She's been investigating artificial intelligence and bias and is working with communities of color to explore how AI intersects race, gender, aging, and future histories. She began this work with a project called Conversations with Bina 48, which is pictured here. Bina 48, as some of you guys might know, is a social robot that is touted as one of the most advanced AIs and presents as a Black woman. In this case, it's modeled on the memories and personality of a real person, Bina Rothblatt. And when Stephanie first encountered this robot, she really wanted to understand, she wanted to ask her essential question, which is, who are your people? And this kind of led to trying to understand who's behind the algorithms that power these projects, and also to teach a sort of kind of AI awareness or AI literacy to communities of color who are often disproportionately affected by these technologies, but not really a part of shaping them and creating them. And her work is now being supported by I-Beam and Sundance and Pioneer Works and foundations like the Soros Foundation. And she's also part of an artist residency that New Ink runs with Nokia Bell Labs. So again, intersecting with Theo's presentation. Another project that I'm really in love with is the work of dancer, choreographer, and disability activist Alice Sheppard. She's been developing a multimedia dance performance called Descent, which is pictured here, which uses a custom-built wheelchair ramp, which is an open source project. At New Ink, she launched a dance studio called Kinetic Light that works with other disability artists, and she's been developing a mobile app, which is an attempt to create new forms of accessibility for visually impaired audiences who might be attending dance performances or other forms of performance. And I'm really excited to share that she was just featured on the cover of Dance Magazine this month, which is a really kind of historic moment for the field. And the last project that I'll share is a company called Micro, which is a social enterprise that's building a fleet of miniature, 6-foot-tall science museums designed to teach people about essential scientific concepts such as evolutionary biology. Their goal is to decentralize museums and make them more accessible by bringing them to communities. They place their tiny museums in public places. This one's in a library, as you can see, where people are already gathering. Some of them are in hospital waiting rooms, like the Bellevue Hospital in New York, schools, and other kind of public places like the DMV and corporate lobbies and things like that. And as you can see, these projects look quite different from the type of incubators that you guys might have here in San Francisco. And the reason is that, our goal with New Ink was to really reimagine the incubator model as one that optimizes for cultural value, not just capital value. That's one of the reasons why we deliberately chose the word incubator as a descriptor for the program. We wanted to interface with this community, with this tech community, and present a different take on what an incubator could be when rooted in a cultural context, much like Gray Area has done here in San Francisco with their own artist incubator. And the focus is really on building capacity and giving creatives the tools to organize, fundraise, and create a sustainable livelihood for themselves and in support of their work. Over the past 4 years, New Ink has supported hundreds of artists, nonprofits, social enterprises, studios, and startups in getting their practice off the ground, raising money, growing their teams, and cultivating business savvy. Which is all to say that I kind of spent a lot of the last 5 years thinking about art and money and the complex and fraught relationship between the two, which is one of the reasons why I was ready for a change of scenery. But anyway, I don't think it's news to anyone to say that the labor economics of the art market are broken. Ruth also alluded to this in her presentation. And if you're someone who's working in time-based media, performance art, or social practice, good luck. I mean, making a living from your work becomes near impossible when your work is immaterial, ephemeral, and infinitely reproducible. Meanwhile, art continues to become ever further entrenched as the asset class de rigueur of the world's uber-rich. But artists are struggling to stay afloat in the increasingly precarious gig economy where they predominantly toil. Of course, artists aren't the only ones affected by the growing trend of replacing stable, salaried jobs, the kind that used to come with 401ks and health insurance, with on-demand contract labor that offers none of these benefits and protections to the worker. And this, in turn, only contributes to mounting income inequality. Those of us who went to art school likely didn't receive much of an education in the business side of creative practice, and as a result, many of us can feel woefully ill-equipped to navigate the demands of the freelance job market. So at New Ink, our aim is to really help creatives become better informed about how business works so that they can more adeptly navigate its power structures. The goal is to help creatives recognize and own their value, leverage the potential of their unique skills and intellectual property, and learn how to build, organize, and lead teams. And these are fundamental skills that I believe are transferable. It doesn't matter whether you're building an interactive installation, a startup, or a nonprofit, but the end result is hopefully giving the artists a little bit more power over their work and the direction that their work takes and the relationships that they broker with their funders and supporters. So for me, the fundamental question in starting Newing was this, can we demystify business thinking in order to explore new ways of moving within its systems of logic? Conceptual artists have been doing this for years, looking for ways to exploit, hijack, hack, or otherwise subvert dominant power structures. Groups like Artist Placement Group, founded in London in 1966 by Barbara Stavini and Jonathan Latham, wanted to change the status of artists and broaden their activities so an artist could make a more direct contribution to society. The group brokered positions for artists in commercial, industrial, and government offices. They placed artists in organizations such as the British Steel Corporation, Ocean Fleets Limited, the Department of Environment, and the Department for Health and Social Security. And what's interesting for me is the group's founders really kind of adopted the language of management and the guise of bureaucracy in order to broker the artist placement and negotiate contracts between the artists and the host organizations, and also to secure funds and payment for APG itself, which were used, of course, to cover the administrative costs and overhead of the operation. Other projects like this contract from art dealer Seth Siegelob called the Artists' Reserved Rights Transfer and Sale Agreement, also known as the Artist Contract. It's an open source contract that attempted to protect the rights and interests of artists as their work circulates within the art world system. So it stipulated that 15% royalty would be owed to the artist on the difference of the resale price of an artwork. So when it goes to auction and it sells for like 10 times what the artist sold it for, the artist gets a cut of that, which is a lot of what we're seeing being discussed in some of the blockchain applications of the payment of artists and the sale of artists' work. While this contract did not become standard use, and in fact a recent US Appeals Court ruling struck down California's Resale Royalties Act, which is the only state in the US to attempt to enforce such a policy, Siegelob's contract is in use by such renowned artists as Adrian Piper and Hans Hock. So much of this work is, of course, rooted in the tradition of institutional critique, an art practice that blossomed out of the intellectual milieu of the 1960s and 70s, but is still very much alive today. While the original generation was focused on exposing the inner workings of art institutions, today's artists are tackling commercial, corporate, and political systems more broadly. Groups like the Danish collective SUPERFLEX, founded in 1993, develop alternative models for the creation, dissemination, and maintenance of social and economic capital. Their projects typically take the form of toolkits and methodologies that invite people to participate in experimental models aiming to expose and alter the forces behind economic production. A great example of this is Guarana Power, which the artists developed a soft drink together with a Guarana farmers cooperative in Maués in the Brazilian Amazon. And the project is a response to the community's economic struggle after a corporate monopoly on the purchase of Guarana seeds drove down the plant's value by 80%, while simultaneously the cost of the consumer-facing product increased. And so SUPERFLEX stated that their intentions with this project was to use global brands and their strategies as raw material for a counter-economic position. And what's interesting to me is not only does the project render these economic structures visible, but it also functions as a consumer brand and attempts to offer a viable alternative. More recently, New York City-based artists like Carolyn Woolard have taken up the challenge of building equitable systems that privilege communal well-being over personal gain. Woolard's projects are many and they're great. I encourage you to check out her work. They include projects like the Study Center for Group Work, which is an in-person network of people who meet to refine collaborative methods. The New York City Real Estate Investment Cooperative, which uses traditional investment strategies to invest in community rather than corporate development. ourgoods.org, which is an online platform for bartering skills, spaces, and objects. And the Exchange Cafe, where visitors to MoMA could acquire tea, milk, and honey through non-monetary means of exchange. Woolard is also one of the co-founders of BFA, MFA, PhD, which is a research collective that produces reports on the state of art education and develops new teaching tools that bring people together to analyze and reimagine power relationships in the arts. And artists have been, building alternative educational institutions since at least the 1920s with the Bauhaus. Contemporary artists run schools like the public school, BHQFU, and the Black School offer alternatives to prevailing pedagogical approaches in order to both challenge and update previously accepted theories, practices, and methodologies. And this seems to be a growing trend. At the recent Alternative Arts School Fair at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, nearly 50 alternative art schools from around the US and the world came together to share experiences and resources. Another interesting development in this space is the rise of artist-formed institutions that behave as both lobbying groups and art projects. This includes groups like Working Artists and the Greater Economy, WAGE, Gulf Labor, and Hank Willis Thomas's Super PAC for Freedoms, which is pictured here. And I think these artist-led enterprises are incredibly inspiring. They're seeking to transform communities in ways large and small. But I have to wonder to what extent they're actually effective at challenging and dismantling these power structures, or whether they just kind of make them visible, right? Because essentially, they're still beholden to a lot of the sources of power, namely funding, that exist in our capitalist society, right? So when you're still trying to get funding from wealthy patrons, it tends to complicate your ideological position somewhat. And of course, this is the crux of some of my internal struggles during my time at New Inc. is that, no matter how you try to intervene, there's only a limited number of ways to access capital, and each of them kind of comes with their own set of compromises and trade-offs, and I haven't found a way around these yet. If you have an answer, please come find me. I'm dying to hear from you. Which is why, at New Inc., our goal was to really help creatives understand their own values, principles, and definitions of success in order to help them devise a business strategy that makes sense for their unique goals and ways of working and their priorities and the change that they were trying to create. We can't bypass the need for capital currently, but we can decide how we choose to work, who we work with, how we structure those relationships, and the impact our work has on our environment and our society. Obviously, this is no longer just about art or creative enterprises. This applies to business in general and is part of a larger counter-narrative that needs to challenge the mythology of startup culture in corporate America. I believe there's real potential to create viable alternatives to the greed-mongering that dominates our understanding of business today, with the adoption of viable business structures that put social responsibility at the center of their operation. Today, we see a growing trend towards social enterprises, businesses that have a double or triple bottom line and attempt to balance mission-driven activities with sustainable business practices. New legal structures like benefit corporations and certified B Corps require companies to uphold and meet a set of ethical standards outlined in their impact assessment. And they look at everything from environmental impact to the treatment of workers. And since these standards are written into their corporate charter and become a part of the organization's legal bylaws, they are powerful tools for protecting the integrity of a mission-driven business, even as future stakeholders may try to influence its direction down the line. Today, there's more than 40,000 certified B Corps in the US, including Etsy, Patagonia, Kickstarter, and some of the ones on here. But an even more promising business structure is not a new idea at all. It's the worker-owned cooperative, which of course rose to prominence alongside the labor movement and the Industrial Revolution. Worker co-ops are employee-owned small businesses that operate under principles of shared ownership and shared governance. Although they are proven to be more resilient during economic downturns than their corporate counterparts, and typically see higher productivity levels and much lower rates of employee turnover, the Democracy at Work Institute, a nonprofit that supports the development of worker co-ops, estimates that there are just 300 worker co-ops in the United States. New School professor Trevor Scholes, along with other prominent peer-to-peer theorists such as Michel Bounds, updated the worker co-op model for the digital age with the concept of platform cooperativism. Created in response to the extractive nature of the so-called sharing economy, the platform co-op is a cooperatively owned, democratically governed business that establishes a computing platform and uses a protocol, website, or mobile app to facilitate the sale of goods and services. The concept is part of a larger peer-to-peer production movement that aims to challenge corporate power through digital disintermediation. Dozens of platform co-ops already exist today and offer services such as ride-hailing, alternatives to Uber, of course, music streaming, and marketplaces for ethically sourced goods. Which brings me to the theme of this year's festival, the blockchain. I am by no means an expert in the blockchain. I took a deep dive in it because I wanted to learn more, and this talk kind of created a great opportunity to do so. And I really have to shout out Ruth and Furtherfield's excellent book, Artists Rethinking the Blockchain. It's an awesome primer on some theory and great ideas coming out of the art space. But yeah, I'm trying to understand it, explore its edges and potential applications, and I've been particularly intrigued by the promise of decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. So first, what is a DAO? And I apologize if I botch this description because I'm not an expert, look it up, but here's my attempt. So a DAO leverages the blockchain's smart contracts feature, which are otherwise known as self-executing contracts. Essentially, these contracts take the form of computer code stored on the blockchain that stipulate the rules of an agreement, like a legal agreement. And these rules are then stored, replicated, and supervised by the network of computers running the blockchain. With a DAO, the bylaws of the organization are embedded into the code of the smart contract, and certain decisions, like the payment of dividends to shareholders, can be automated, while tokens can be used for shareholder voting to solve more complex issues of governance, such as choosing one service provider over another, or how money gets spent, essentially. On the one hand, DAOs seem ready-made to usher in a golden age of platform co-ops and potentially to help govern regular co-ops as well. The blockchain's distributed public ledger allows for greater security and transparency, and therefore trust, in the organization's activities. This transparency allows the organization to maintain trust even as the organization scales beyond the scale of human relationships and human trust. It also avoids having decision makers in positions of power making decisions on behalf of the collective, which may or may not be in line with the best interests of the collective. But DAOs and smart contracts are far from perfect. For one thing, the blockchain's immutability doesn't allow for mistakes or changing your mind, which is a bit of a problem. And fixing a bug or changing a policy isn't as simple as pushing an update, but rather require forking the whole system. As we saw with the DAO, not to be confused with DAOs in general, which took me a minute, which was an organization established in 2016 on the Ethereum blockchain, this can lead to fragmentation and entrenchment. Only 1 month after its inception, the DAO suffered a hack that exploited some vulnerabilities in its code, siphoning off some $50 million worth of tokens. And after much deliberation, the Ethereum community decided to fork its code and return the funds to their original owners. However, purists who believed the attack was legitimate, although unethical, were upset with Ethereum for the fork and have continued to use the original Ethereum blockchain, renamed Ethereum Classic. The other potential pitfall of DAOs, or automated systems in general, is that they are designed to follow a set of immutable instructions ad infinitum, and to optimize for the implicit values inherent in those instructions. Similar to Nick Bostrom's paperclip maximizer thought experiment, in which an AI whose goal is to maximize the number of paperclips in its collection could destroy humanity, even without a malicious intent. I think the paperclip example, of course, is a bit absurd, but one could imagine how a DAO like Terra Zero, sorry Max, a self-owning AI forest designed to propagate in order to provide automated resilient systems for ecosystems could, in an effort to convert all the world's landmass into forests, potentially wipe out humanity. I don't know, maybe. Maybe not. Max assures me this is not possible. something created with only the best of intentions, taken to its natural conclusion, to this kind of absolute extreme, without proper contingencies put in place at the outset, could inadvertently produce a less than desirable result. Which is one of the reasons why I think it's crucial for artists to be active in this space right now. We need to continue to design thought experiments and potential applications for the blockchain that put care for people, animals, and natural resources at the center of these systems. And despite the challenges and complications of the blockchain, and I'm sure I'm only scratching the surface here, but if it really is this new internet, as so many are touting it to be, perhaps it offers an opportunity to redesign and reprogram our society with a different set of rules. But who gets to decide what those rules are and how similar or different they'll be to our current reality is kind of what's at stake right now. So I want to end with the words of poet Audre Lorde, where she says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." I've been a little bit frustrated over the past 5 years with this kind of ineffectual resistance of the forces that be, and I am kind of intrigued about the potential to build new tools, and perhaps the blockchain offers an opportunity to do so. I don't know, and that's kind of why I'm here, and I would love to talk to you all about that. So, thanks.